Hello, my TikTok people, my YouTube people when I cross-post this, my Instagram people when I also cross-post this there, and probably my Facebook people when they see my Instagram story through Facebook. How are we doing tonight? Let's talk about advocacy. Now, let's begin by rewinding time a little to when all of us were kind of bothered by a person referring to stuff they did as counseling or therapy when, as far as any of us know, they weren't really credentialed as a counselor or a therapist, thus didn't have any board of behavioral health oversight. Ugh. Those terms are meaningful because they imply a certain level of professionalism and experience and a certain kind of safety for a person who's coming to participate in a really vulnerable thing where the stakes are pretty high and the damage can be pretty awful if you're not met with professionalism and someone who knows what they're doing, knows the methods, and has a place you can go to report them if they should abuse the power, because it is an uneven power dynamic when you're in a relationship, in a therapeutic space, a counseling space, a container space. You're submitting your vulnerable, wounded moments to someone else to be witnessed and then hopefully met with regard and hopefully guided through a healing process. And that requires certain ethical standards in place to make sure that abusive situations don't arise for the well-being of a person who's coming to seek healing. So I want you to write down a website and visit it. You can pause this video and visit it now or save it for after, but it's thenacp.org. That's THENACP.org. Did you know there is a national advocate credentialing program? Just to be considered a provisional advocate, you have to take 40 hours of coursework. That's to be provisional. Once you have that, to my understanding from what I've reviewed on thenacp.org, you have to do over 3,000 hours of work in the field just to move up to the basic level. And that's just level 2 of 4. It's over 5 figures of hours to get to the final tier. And just mathematically breaking that down, if I was to work every single week, 52 weeks a year for 40 hours a week, I would accomplish about 2080 hours of work in whatever I was doing those 40 hours a week. So we're talking probably at least 1.5 to 2 years experience, because realistically, someone's not doing the full 40 hours of their week just doing this one thing, especially if they're like in a provisional place. I don't have the experience to know exactly how that process ends up playing out, but I've at least perused the website and had a few conversations with people who know way more than me for a few hours of trying to get some of the jargon straight, because I've been misusing it too. I've referred to some of the stuff I've done as advocating, and I'm going to stop doing that because I've learned that is irresponsible at the end of the day, and it undermines the work and the training of professional advocates, because those people know how to actually navigate the court systems. They have specialty areas to navigate specific types of crimes and the victims of those crimes. And so for me to run around being like, calling myself by that label could create a very unpleasant situation for a very vulnerable person who's placing trust in me that I don't deserve, because I'm not going to be a good resource for that person. I do not know what I do not know in order to navigate a system for them. And at the core of a lot of the issues we've experienced at International House of Prayer, that was what was happening. We had people taking on things because they want to help, and it might have even been well-intentioned, but they were doing things they didn't have the training or experience to properly navigate in the best interest of the person that they were supposedly helping, and that led to grievous injury for people. I mean, if you remember some of my early videos going back to October and early November of 2023, when the Mike Bickle allegations first broke, I started talking about like, hey, like they want you to go talk to your zone leaders, but is that zone leader actually trained? Is IHOP a trauma-informed organization? Can they actually A to Z you through a process in a way that does not add to your injury? No. And a lot of places aren't, because a person in isolation cannot be trauma-informed. They can have trauma awareness and understanding, but trauma-informed is a systemic A to Z procedural way of carrying someone through a process that can't happen in isolation. And it's more than what the name seems to imply, just like with the word advocate. And I was talking about how even as a resident assistant at a university, I had to be trained at least in how to get someone handed off to the right resources if they were going through the kinds of things that will come up when someone is in college and living on campus, thus experiencing the entirety of their life generally within the same vicinity, which is most of everything. And so we did get training to walk people through incidents of ideation or other situations of harm or potential harm, etc. But that was rudimentary. I brought that up initially because it was just like, at International House of Prayer, from talking to people, it seemed like they didn't even have some of the knowledge that I had from that training I got as a 19-year-old. And like, that was only like a week of training. That's not even near the amount of hours investment that would need to go into just being considered a basic level advocate. Same thing when I was in university doing EMTB training. I never took the National Registry. I only took the course to get the skills and experience. I was never any kind of certification as an EMTB. Just to be clear, I took the training and I passed the class with flying colors, but did not ever take the National Registry exam. But the point there is, like, as an EMT trainee, I'm doing work, or the work of an EMT that's getting done is first responder level training on how to deal with these types of situations, because you're going to be responding to assault, you're going to be responding to any kind of bodily trauma that can happen, and sometimes psychological as well. But you are handing people off to people with more resource, but just to be the person to hand a person off to the one with more resource, you have to be trained in how to keep that person stabilized in the meantime. So even just being that mediation in between person to get someone to the right resource still requires training, still requires oversight, still requires accountability, because otherwise, as a link in that chain, you could cause further harm. Like, I think of the disease chain, the chain of infection. Like, when you have a chain, if one link breaks, the entire chain breaks. And that's kind of the thing with being trauma-informed, is it's the A to Z process. And so, like, good intentions aren't enough. Having experience with trauma is not enough. Like, in order to successfully just be that intermediary, you still need to recognize your own limitations, or you can end up harming people. And so a lot of us have had really good intent, but we don't know what we don't know. And I just encourage people to sit with that. Have a good night, everyone. I'll have more to say. This video is just getting long, so just consider this an introduction to an ongoing conversation.